Good morning, everyone. Hope you're all having a wonderful day today. Today we're going to be talking about the Sig Romeo 7. This is a very, very high value red dot that I get questions about all the time. But before we get into the review of the red dot, if you don't know, this channel and video is sponsored by Gun Deals. Gun Deals is just a website that provides you with links to some of the best prices in the industry on a wide variety of products. They don't take your money, they don't buy or sell anything. Again, they only point you in the right direction. So of course, if that is something that you're interested in, go ahead and check them out. If you want to help me out personally, you can of course like, share, and subscribe. All that sort of stuff is free and does help me out quite a bit. Go ahead and comment literally anything down below. On top of that, there's Subscribe Star, which is basically just a pro to a Patreon, and we have some very cool stuff going on there very soon. Now, full disclosure on this optic, I did purchase this optic from Borelli.com with my own money. I believe I paid $200 for it, which is basically the going rate. It goes for anywhere from $180 to $200, depending on if you can find it for a good deal. I have no relationship with Sig whatsoever. However, I have reviewed a bunch of their products in the past very positively. The Sig Romeo 5, which is one of the best budget red dots you can buy, MSR and other products like that. Most of the products that Sig makes are very, very good, provided you don't buy a Gen 1 gun. So starting off with some of the boring specifications on the optic, as you can see here, it is equipped with a QD mount. We'll get into it later, but it does come with two different mounts from the factory. Within the box, it comes with the QD mount and then of course a straight up Picatinny mount, which is better for more situations. However, since I've had this optic on about 4 different guns, the QD lever does come in handy. This optic is much larger than your standard red dot, and this is basically just your standard red dot. It is a 30mm objective, which is much larger and gives you a much larger window. Some people really, really like having that larger objective, that larger window to see more through their optic. I totally get where they're coming from. For me personally, it doesn't make that big of a deal, except for a couple scenarios, which we will talk about, but this does have the larger, more preferable window size for most people. It is a slightly heavy optic. You can see it is basically the size of an EOTech 512 or like, what is it, the Aimpoint Pro. And so with the mount included, it weighs a whopping 12.5 ounces, just underneath some of the lightweight LPVOs that are on the market, or just above the EOTech 512, which is around 11 ounces. Now, what you get with all that weight is theoretically a very, very tanky optic for about half the price of the cheapest EOTech, or about a third to a quarter the cost of most Aimpoints. Now, some of the features that this optic has are also very, very good. So it has 11 illumination settings, 2 night vision settings, 9 daylight settings, though we'll get into it later, but most of the daylight settings are just going to be the top 3 settings that you're really going to use. However, at a medium setting, which I imagine is setting 6, you get 62,500 hours of battery life. Now that is above and beyond the kind of industry standard for micro red dots of 50,000 hours. That's about 6.25 years of battery life on this optic on setting 6. Realistically, it's going to be somewhat less than that if you use it just maximum brightness all the time, because of course it will use exponentially more battery. However, this optic is also coupled with motion activation, or MOTAC as Sig calls it. Motion activation is basically just anytime you move the optic, after a certain amount of time, it turns back on. So I believe there's no way to switch it on this optic, or at least I can't figure out how to switch it, but I believe it's after 12 hours it automatically shuts off, and then once you pick it up or move it again, it will automatically turn back on. I have never seen the dot turn on or off, and that is just how good the optic is. I've had motion activation on several Sig optics, never had a problem with any of them, so I don't imagine this one here to be any different. I have had this for quite some time now. I believe about 3 or 4 months. I put it on a lot of different guns. At this point, I've shot well over 1,000 rounds with this optic attached, and it has performed flawlessly in every situation. Now, part of that exceptional battery life, and coupled with the motion activation, which is an excellent feature, I think it does basically extend your battery life into as long as your battery can hold a charge. For instance, here is a Energizer Ultimate Lithium battery, so very, very high quality battery, just a single AA battery, fits into the side, and then you can find AA's basically anywhere, and they are very, very cheap, and in this case they're actually easier to get in and out, and toolless design. You don't need a tool to take off the battery cap, so it's just a very nicely knurled knob that is still O-ring sealed for waterproof. So this is an IPX7 certified optic, which just means 3 feet for 30 minutes. Now, if I haven't mentioned it, this is your standard 6061 T6 aluminum body, hard coat anodized, very, very standard in that regard. You do have capped windage and elevation turrets, which I quite like, and they're also very heavily armored. There are large chunks of aluminum protecting the sides and the fronts of both of your windage and elevation, which I quite like. However, you will notice that I have the rubber attachment points that make sure that your turrets are captured. I have those removed because they make it very, very obnoxious to adjust your windage and elevation. Since I was putting this on a lot of different guns and I had to constantly change my zero on it for different guns because it does not retain zero with the QD mount on different guns, obviously, because every gun, every barrel is a little bit different. So because I had to always change my zero, and these rubber attachments made it just more obnoxious to actually get the dials on and off, I just took them off, and I probably won't attach them again because, again, this optic is very easy to put onto different guns. Now, the windage and elevation adjustments themselves are half MOA, and you don't need a tool to do it. You can actually just use the cap that it comes with to adjust them up and down. Again, half MOA, very nice, very positive clicks, actually a lot better than some LPVOs now that I think about it. But it is more of a set and forget optic. Now, something very, very interesting about red dots with a 30 MOA or 30 millimeter main tube is that you have an insane amount of internal adjustment. So for instance, I believe this optic has 200 MOA of internal elevation adjustment, which is way more than you would ever need, and since it's a red dot, you're really only going to be setting it up for like anywhere between a 25 and 100 yard zero, so you're never going to need that much adjustment, but it is there in theory. Now let's go ahead and get into some of the testing that I've done on the optic. As I've already mentioned, I've had this optic for quite some time on a lot of different guns, 22, 5.56, 7.62 x 39, and some 12 gauge. Actually, a couple hundred rounds of 12 gauge, mostly buckshot and some steel hunting loads, and the optic has taken all of that like a champ. There has been no shift or no appreciable shift in zero, nothing that I could notice from start to finish on any of the guns that I put it on, and no matter what shooting position that I was shooting in, they performed very, very well, again, in whatever circumstance I could put it in. Now, I should mention that all of the testing that I did on this optic was with the QD mount installed. The reason for that is very simple. When I opened up the box, it had the QD mount installed, and I was too lazy to put on the straight Picatinny adapter, so all the testing was done on the QD mount. Usually not a big fan of QD mounts, usually don't think they're quite as secure as standard Picatinny mounts that you can just lock down as tight as you want. However, this mount performed very, very well. Now, talking about that, on the 12 gauge shotgun in the background that I put it on, I've had two different mounts come loose while shooting on that shotgun. The Holosun 503G, I believe, and the Sig Romeo 5. Their stock mounts are nowhere near good enough to handle 12 gauge recoil. They always back themselves off and become loose and just start wobbling on the mounts. However, I had no problem whatsoever with more ammunition, more aggressive ammunition on this optic with, again, just the integrated QD mount. If you're looking for a sleek display option for your AR-15, then you might want to check out Print Apart of Alabama. They're offering a lightweight, high-strength polymer 3D printed mag stands that will fit a wide variety of your guns, everything from SCARs to your standard ARs. They also come in several colors and can be engraved with your name and logo without breaking the bank. For more info, go ahead and check out the website on screen and the link in the description. Thanks to Print Apart for helping support the channel. Most of you should know that basically all of the optics that I test get a double drop test, and this optic is no different. So we went ahead and did a 5-round group at 25 yards as a control group before the double drop test, then went ahead and did our double drop test, which is one on the top of the optic from shoulder height onto dirt and rocks, one on the side of the optic from, again, shoulder height onto dirt and rocks, and then a 5-round group after that. Now, one caveat on the second group is I pulled 2 rounds in a row, so that is my fault being a doofus. So I went ahead and actually shot 7 rounds at 25 yards for the second group. So I had 5 rounds that were actually good pulls and two shots where I did not pull the trigger correctly and I jerked it off to the right. It wasn't the fault of the optic or the gun, it was just me being a doofus. Now, the optic basically took no damage whatsoever. There's no appreciable difference on it whatsoever in terms of feel or anything like that, because 99% of the impact actually occurred on the large chunks of aluminum that are next to the windage and elevation dial, because those are the tallest parts of the optic, and they're literal just huge chunks of aluminum that protect your windage and elevation knobs. So that is actually what took the brunt of the impact and what causes this optic to be very, very strong, because that is, again, just, it looks like about a ½ inch thick piece of aluminum that takes the brunt of the impact, not your optic body that has its precious glass and internals on side, but this actual large piece of aluminum that is just kind of sacrificial on the outside of it. Now, something else that I like about the optic in terms of its durability is the front and rear glass are actually recessed within the optic. So the front is about, looks like 3/4 inch recessed, so the glass is actually right about here, and the rear glass is actually right about here. So if you manage to slam something into the front of the optic, you don't need to worry about damaging that glass, as there is a huge chunk of aluminum up here protecting your glass, and then this smaller piece of aluminum back here protecting the rear of your glass, which is probably the least likely place to have an impact on your glass. Now, just to go ahead and show you guys what the other mount looks like, as I really haven't taken it out of the box at all. The other mount is just the exact same thing basically, but instead of a QD lever, it just has your standard locking nut that locks down. I think you can go up to like 50 or 60 foot-pounds or inch-pounds of pressure on it to get it locked down. Now, both mounts very nicely have integrated recoil lugs on the bottom of the mount that locks into your Picatinny rail. So basically what you do there is, when you have it loose, push down on the top of your rail, push forward, and that way there you have a hard contact surface not only on the sides of your Picatinny rails, but also on the top with that recoil lug that is pressed up against the front of the rail. And I can show you that here. This is my Ballistic Advantage 12.5 upper receiver. So wherever I want to put it, and then slide it forward. Now, it should be noted that there is very little forward-backward play on here because that recoil lug is properly sized. You could go a little bit tighter on tolerance on there, but not much. So basically you push down and forward and then lock your lever in place just like that. Now I have it set up pretty stiff, but there it is on there, and it's not ever coming loose. Now let's go ahead and talk about the glass and the dot on the optic. So the glass is very good, I'm going to say. It's basically going to be on par with most other budget red dots, maybe a little bit better, because technically speaking it does collect more light just by virtue of having a larger surface area, that 30mm window. However, it's not going to beat anything like an EOTech or an Aimpoint in terms of glass clarity. It is, of course, there's no magnification to it whatsoever. It is a very, very flat, very true image that you get through it. On top of that, the dot, it's just a 2 MOA dot, is crisp, although not the best dot that I've seen. There are some other crisper dots on the market. However, it is more than fine enough for anything that I've ever had to do with a red dot. Some people might be have a preference one way or the other on that. However, that is just fine for me. It does a good job. There's not really a blue notch filter like you see in some other optics like Holosuns and other optics like that. Now, the colors to me personally look very natural. If anything, there's a slight green tint just due to whatever coating or filter that they have on the glass itself. Most of that is due to trying to increase the dot clarity and the battery life, of course, because if they can get that battery to use less power to appear as bright to the human eye, then they'll do that to try and get, again, that 62,500 hours of battery life, which is a huge amount of battery life. However, most people are never really going to see that with the motion activation because the battery life is essentially infinite, or as long as that battery can actually hold the charge. For me personally, the glass and the dot work very, very well together. Now, one thing that I haven't really mentioned is the overall brightness on 11. It does start to bloom out and flare quite a bit indoors. However, when you're outside in broad daylight, like 100% daylight with rocks that are reflective, very, very bright environments, you're basically going to always have the dot set to either 10 or 11 based on your preferences. I did find that I was running it on 11 most of the time when I'm out in 100% daylight. If there's anything less than 100% daylight, if you have some cloud cover, if you're around trees or anything else like that, you can back it off to 10 or 9 depending on your scenario, though the dot itself does not get quite as bright as some other red dots, though again at 11 it is more than bright enough for most people. I was personally most comfortable most of the time in 100% broad, very, very bright circumstances being at 11, although most people would probably find it usable at 10 or 9 as well. Now let's go ahead and talk about some of the downsides that this optic has. Again, depending on who you are, these will be bigger or smaller downsides. So it doesn't use a standard mounting platform for the Sig Romeo 7, at least as far as I can tell. So basically you're married to either the QD system or the low mount. Now, if I haven't mentioned, it does come with a spacer to make the low mount or the regular Picatinny mount, which is actually shorter than the QD mount, to push that up to the 153. With the QD mount installed as it comes from the factory, it sits at 1.535, I think. I don't know why they get that specific about it, but that's a very good height. Most of the time you see me running it straight up on a Red Dot. It's going to be on a riser like this. This is the UTG 13 slot Picatinny riser. Has a huge clamping area on the side with 3 screws that lock it down, and it has 3 integrated squared off recoil lugs. So this is a excellent riser, 1/2-inch riser, pushing it up to just over 2 inches tall. For again, these are about $13 to $15. So they're very, very good. I've had excellent luck with them. So there is a lack of aftermarket mounting options for this optic. If you did want to get it into something like a super tall mount or a super low mount, you're going to be very limited and going to basically have to use another mount to get it taller. And if you're trying to get it lower, well, then you're kind of just SOL. Now, for me personally, not that big of a deal for most people. However, depending on your gun, your platform, your setup, what you want to use it for, that could be a deal breaker. It's definitely not going to have the sort of compatibility like you get with the Aimpoint T1, T2 system, or the MRO, or even things like the ACOG that have a lot of other mounting options. This is basically stuck with exactly what it is. Now, on top of that, you also have a very heavy optic at 12.5 ounces. This is about 3 times heavier than most micro red dots. However, theoretically, it is more durable than those red dots. It does have a lot of aluminum protecting it, so I am very comfortable dropping it onto concrete from about 6 feet. And of course, the optic is going to be just fine, though there is a part of me that still wouldn't put it up against, you know, an EOTech or an Aimpoint in terms of true ultimate durability, but this is definitely going to be a step above some of your other budget red dots, which is where I think it really shines. If you don't want to spend $400 to $800 on a red dot, but you might be willing to spend $200 on a red dot for, again, increased battery life, bigger window, technically more durable than some of your other micro red dots, then this could be, and really is, one of the only red dots in that category, provided you don't mind the fact that you only have a couple mounting options, and of course this is a larger, heavier optic. So for me personally, the Sig Romeo 7 would be a perfect home defense optic, or really any sort of serious use optic that you can think of, provided that you're, again, fine with the size and the weight and the lack of mounting options. But that is going to be just about it for the video, guys. Let me know what you guys think of the Sig Romeo 7, or if there are any other red dots that I should check out that kind of compete with it. But again, I do want to thank you guys for watching, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace off.